Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today I actually have a speed bake for you. Basically that just means I recorded myself decorating a cake and I sped it up and took out some of the more boring parts. But what I am excited about is that this is actually a llama cake that I made for someone's birthday. And basically I started here with a crumb coated cake and now I am just adding on kind of its final layer of buttercream and I'm going to smooth it out. And then what I'm going to do is actually use this frosting comb. Basically you can notice that it's got like little teeth etched in it and it creates a design on the cake when you drag it across the frosting. So you can see some of those lines occurring right now. And what this will allow us to do is actually create stripes on our cake. So I decided that that's kind of the look I wanted for this cake. So here I am basically just doing it over and over again because it's very important that you have very smooth lines. So specifically the raised portions that you see here, they need to be completely solid because what we're gonna do is end up going back and then adding colored frosting in the indented portions. And so if you have any like holes in that raised portion, colored frosting will get in it and then you no longer have really clean lines for your stripes. So you can see me going back, you know, with the cake comb and then saying, oh, I still have holes in some of my stripes. So then I just add a little more buttercream. This particular batch of buttercream had a lot of air pockets in it, as you can see, but don't worry, we smoothed them out, but it just takes it a little more time. This is quite a long process, or at least it can be depending on the consistency of your buttercream, the complexity of your cake home, and just kind of how it's gonna go that day. They can be a little bit temperamental, but totally worth it in the end. They look so amazing. And the trick is once you have the very clean raised portions, the indented portions can have little air bubbles. That's fine, you're gonna cover it up with more frosting anyways. But what's important is actually once you're done is throwing that cake in the fridge. I do it for about 20 minutes and that hardens the raised portion. So when you go back with the colored frosting, it's easier to smooth out and you don't lose those nice clean lines because that buttercream has hardened. So in my case, the white portions have hardened so they don't like mix in with all of the colors that you decide to use. So again, I'm just doing it over and over again. As you can see, we're finally taking its final form where this looks a little bit nicer, a little bit cleaner. And then I'm just going ahead and smoothing out the top of the cake. And again, I'm not super concerned because you can tell between that last raised layer and the top, there's a indented space. So I'm going to be putting color there. So I'm not too worried if it's like super clean because I'm going to be putting more frosting and then just cleaning up the cake board a little bit before I pop it in the fridge because once it's hardened on the cake board, it is there. And so for this cake, I decided to actually use some fondant gum paste decorations on top. So you can see the llamas I have right there are just made of fondant. Fondant stays soft. Cakes can be covered in it, decorations can be made from it, but it doesn't really harden. So what I actually just got just now was something called gum paste. It's similar to fondant except for the fact that it hardens. And so I'm actually now using that because I decided I wanted to actually stand some llamas up on the cake as well as have those other two shapes you have there. I wanted to use those as like a happy birthday sign. So I'm going back and just making some out of gum paste so those I know will stand up. And the more gum paste you use, the faster it dries. So you can decide how you want to like mix your fondant and gum paste together. And then you can see I'm just sticking some toothpicks in there and that'll allow me to actually stick it into the cake once it dries. So for that one, I actually just stuck them into the gum paste. I'm gonna do actually another one where I attach the toothpicks to actually the back of that fondant gum paste mixture. And I'm actually gonna basically tape it on there with more gum paste. That sounds really weird, but I'll do that in a second. So I'm actually going to, again, cookie cutter some of those out. And then I'm gonna take little tiny pieces of that gum paste and basically use that as like a tape to connect the toothpick to that cutout. So you see me just making a few more. And I always, when I do things like this and I make toppers, especially ones that I know have to harden, I make a lot of them. So a lot of extras to make sure that I don't run out or if something happens to it, if they break, if, you know, whatever, I know that I'm going to be painting these. So if I don't like the way it turned out, I have multiple options. So I usually make a bunch of extras, probably more than I need to, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So you can see again, me kind of basically just putting a little bit of gum paste on the back to help it harden. And like the glue that I'm using is literally just a little bit of water with a tiny bit of gum paste mixed into it. And that actually creates a really nice glue for it. And then I'm just gonna leave those to dry. And then we'll come back a little bit later and actually paint and decorate them so they can be placed on top of the cake. So I really enjoyed the way these turned out, and I'm actually, at this point, I decided to leave in me mixing the colors because I feel like people don't think about all that goes into decorating a cake, especially when it comes to cakes with a bunch of colors. So you actually have to take all the time to mix those. I'm using gel coloring here, so that like tiny little bottle. It's a little bit different than like the liquid food coloring that you would get like from the grocery store. I like using gel because usually they're more vibrant and they also don't have extra liquid in it, so it's a lot thicker. So it doesn't change the consistency of whatever you're making. Now, I will say though, if you want to dye like chocolate, you need to use special like candy coloring because any kind of liquid can like mess up chocolate. But that's just like an overall, just FYI. And you can see I randomly just like pull sprinkles out of nowhere. What I'm doing is I have sprinkles that I want to use on the cake and I'm trying to match the color to it. So like I had to go back and add a little bit of white frosting to the blue because I wanted to lighten that color up just a little bit. And if only I could actually mix frosting color this quickly. I actually sped this up like 800% to give you an idea of how long that actually took me. And then here at this point, you can actually see I'm taking those colors and using a piping bag to put the color where I want it in between all of the white stripes we already created. So again, using that so you don't get extra color all over the place. So, and again, limiting some of that color bleeding that can happen into the stripes if you only put it in designated areas. And then you can see I have a little bit of white on hand too to fill in any gaps that I may have missed when I was doing the original stripes. So then once I feel like I've got a good covering there, I'll use my scraper and just take off some of that excess. And then it is a process. You go in and you say, oh, well, there's some space here. I'm going to add a little more color, do another swipe. And you kind of do that over and over again. You can see it looks a little bit rough right now. You've got stuff all over the place. But don't worry, it cleans up. So the more you keep swiping and it keeps taking off the excess. And what happens is it takes off that top layer, right? So then you get down to those nice clean lines that you made earlier, which again is why it's so important to get those clean lines the first time around, because that makes this part of the process a lot simpler. And so these were the colors that I chose, and you did see me mixing green earlier. Don't worry, I'll be using those later to put some cacti on top of the cake, which I'm really excited about. This cake was actually made for one of my husband's coworkers' wives who was having a birthday get together and wanted llamas for the cake. And so they just kind of let me go for it. And so this is what I came up with. And so again, we swipe over and over and over again. And a tip to help get like smooth buttercream is I usually actually use hot water and heat up that scraper, which is also why I prefer metal scrapers over like you'll see plastic ones, because you can actually heat them up and get the clean lines. So then at this point, I wasn't exactly even sure what I wanted the top of the cake to look like, but then I decided I actually really liked the way the orange blended into the white. And so I actually started taking the other colors and doing the same thing. So just putting a little bit, scraping it, so it all blends together. To me, it actually ends up almost looking like tie-dye, which now makes me want to make like a tie-dye cake. But anyways, I keep layering and layering until basically I'm happy with the way it turned out. And then I basically try to fill in kind of all that white space. And then, so it gives it a nice look on top, because basically on top I'm just going to have some cacti and then those llamas and the happy birthday sign that you'll see me decorate here in just a little bit. And then I'm going to add actually a ton of sprinkles hand placed on the side of this cake. And it seems a little bit tedious when you like watch me do it, but I actually find it really relaxing. And I also decided for the design of this cake that I wanted to put like little frosting like swags around the side. And you may not be able to tell, but I actually used a round like cookie cutter to actually put an impression on the side of the cake to guide where I'm gonna frost, because I cannot freehand perfect circles like that to save my life. So I use that to help guide me, and it also gives me an idea of actually how big they need to be. So if I do that prior to putting the frosting on the cake. It, you know, helps from making any kind of mistakes. And then I literally just have the frosting bags with different tips on it, and then I just kind of keep layering it until I'm happy with it. And then I actually end up creating in between each of those. The reason I did that overlap is I knew I wanted to put tassels there, so it really didn't matter if the little blue lines intersected a little bit there. And so I'm going to go back, and I did end up cutting a lot of that out because it just took me quite a while to do. So we're going to do that there in a second. Yeah, so like they're just magically there, but basically I take each of them and then create the little tiny lines that makes like the tassels, and then put like a blue swirl on top. And then I'm later going to add sprinkles to those as well, but I'm using a toothpick to actually help. So when I create that like frosting drop, that I can help detach it from the bag, because it kept wanting to just stick to the bag and then it would come off with it and then I'd lose my tassel. So it took a little bit of time, but like totally worth it. It looked so amazing. And then I'm just going back here with some gold sprinkles in between each of those little tassels. And I'm using basically this pin that's kind of tacky on the end that helps you pick up sprinkles and gems and things like that individually, so it's easier to place because those sprinkles are really tiny and then you don't have to touch them all. You can just use that guy. I think you can actually just get those, or like people use those for like nail art to pick up gems if you do nail art. And you can see I'm adding here very particular sprinkles to the white stripes to add a little bit of pizzazz, and again bringing the gold in with the cake plate, as well as some of those sprinkles along the bottom and the ones that we included with the tassels. And so now finally, once these have actually hardened and dried up, we're going to decorate them. I'm using a food safe pin. This is not just like a Sharpie or something. So it's made for food so that you can easily write and do details. So I added the little face to the llamas and then wrote happy birthday on the sign. And here I'm going back, you can kind of see like I have like a color palette there, and it's got some edible gold like paint. So that's what I'm adding to the hooves, the tail, the ears, and then I'm putting like a swag along the llama, which I'm gonna go add more color and little pom-poms too, which I think it turned out really awesome. And then the way you actually make the rest of those paints, so the gold I bought kind of already pre-mixed, but the other ones, they're just the dye that I used earlier so that I get that good color match. And then you mix it with a little bit of, depending on what you want to use, people have used like rose water, lemon juice, vodka, things like that, to basically so that it'll evaporate once you paint it and it'll dry up. So you can see here that I'm kind of adding some color to the swag and then adding little pom-poms as I go. And I'm doing like one color at a time and then going back. And I also did the same thing on the happy birthday sign, adding some of those swags to it so that it would also be nice and colorful and match the llamas that will end up on top of the cake. And again, I just use the same colors that I used on the side of the cake. So bringing in the blue, orange, pink, and then purple. I believe that was all of them. I almost can't even remember what I've named already. But I just thought that it would just be a nice touch, and just, again, bringing in the gold everywhere so that it's all nice and cohesive. And then I think I give you a close-up in a second. I kind of hold them up to the camera so you can kind of see what those look like. And then I've also got, at the end, I've got some screenshots as well. Not screenshots, but photos of the cake. And this is actually my favorite part, when it all comes together. So I'm just sticking those in the top of the cake there, and then adding the cacti. So just using a piping bag with like a star tip, and basically just wherever I feel like there needs to be a cactus, I put one there. I made some of them taller, some of them shorter, and I mixed them so it looks a little more organic. And then we're actually going to go back and decorate them individually a little bit. And you can also, if you want to, do these like on parchment paper, throw them in the fridge, and then individually place them once they've hardened. But I just decided to pipe them on the cake and kind of skipping that in-between step. But we are going to go back and then actually add little flowers to the top of some of the cacti to give it a little bit of personality. And again, bringing in some of that pink. And so that's just a little flower piping tip. And then we also go back and add some sugar pearls to the top of some of them to give the other ones a little personality. And then I believe it was the ones with the sugar pearls, I go back and actually add some white buttercream, like dots down the side, like thorns, basically. And is that what they're called on cacti? Thorns? feel like that's not true, but you know what I mean. Just adding a little more detail to those cacti. And then that'll basically be kind of finishing up our cake. But I think adding those little details just really adds something to the cake and just gives it a lot more dimension. Overall, I am in love with this cake so much. I think it turned out so great. But we're nearing the end of this video, so if you're still here and you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more like it. And I hope you enjoy the photos that I have at the end of this video, and I hope you have a really sweet day. Bye, everybody.